Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this video. This video is going to walk you through our second and much longer questionnaire for nonprofit formation. So first and foremost, congratulations on starting the process to form your nonprofit. Hope you're doing some good out there in the world, and we're happy to help you do that. This questionnaire allows you and your team to go through and enter the information that we need in order to go through the process with the IRS to get your tax exemption for your nonprofit. So given the fact that this questionnaire is pretty long, we do have little explanations throughout it, but I thought that a video would be helpful for those of you that want to go the extra mile and watch this video. Now, the video will have some time codes in the YouTube so that you can go to the section that you need to see for the questionnaire. So hopefully that organization is also helpful for you. Now, starting the questionnaire, some really basic information here. Organization, if there's a specific organization email, and then another email, yours, so that we can interact with you, are going to be the first things that we request. Now, the organization narrative. This is a relatively long sort of thing that you need to draft up, and here's the essential questions that we would like to see in your answer. And, the not so fun part is if we don't see all this stuff, we're going to come back to you. There's going to be a bunch of back and forth, and then that will be how we get all of the answers here. So try to be as thorough as possible. It minimizes the time we go back and forth, which quickens up, I don't think that's great English, it quickens up the process for us getting the application submitted. Now, the one that folks typically forget to include here is this percentage of total time of the organization will be dedicated to an activity. What we'd like to see there is something along the lines of this right here. Including a breakdown like this is what the IRS likes to see. And so you can do the narrative, and then you can do the breakdown of the different activities and the percentages for those. And really, at the end of the day, please keep in mind that with this entire questionnaire and the entire application for the IRS, it's important to remember that the IRS understands you don't have a crystal ball. You're going to include things in here that are aspirational, that are goals, that are the plans, and that stuff will change. And so it's important to understand that don't spend too much time worrying about or stressing about making this stuff perfect and trying to look into the future and predict all of the things and all of the time you're going to spend and everything that you'll do. Put in there what you plan to do, what your best guess is, and what you expect the time allotments for that percentage breakdown to be. And if things change over time, that is expected and understood and totally permitted for a nonprofit organization. Sometimes filings have to be made to make changes, but for the most part, just try to do your best here on predicting the future, knowing that no one expects you to actually be clairvoyant and know the future. Then here, this one's super important. Actually, this one, your charitable purpose. So this is going to be one, maybe two sentences, and it is supposed to be very broad. So, for instance, if I was going to start a nonprofit organization to provide low-cost and pro bono legal services to immigrants, since I'm in San Diego, that came to mind, I would say something along the lines here of providing low-cost and pro bono services to immigrants and other individuals in need, and adding that individuals in need and just sort of providing a general legal services as part of the statement. So again, it would be providing low-cost and pro bono legal services to immigrants and those individuals in need. That's super broad, and those individuals in need allows me to help people that maybe aren't just immigrants. It allows me to provide any type of legal services because I did not specify. And so those are the types of things you want to be really broad about in your charitable purpose. And I know that you want to be specific, right? Like we get people that are like, we are going to help save Cocker Spaniels from local shelters in the San Diego region between the ages of 2 months and 5 years old. That's awesome that that's who you want to help, those specific breeds of dog in those ages. I would recommend that you include something along the lines of helping rescue dogs and other pets from shelters in the San Diego region. And then that allows you to be much more broad if all of a sudden someone comes to you with a dog that you really want to save that's not a Cocker Spaniel between 2 months and 5 years. So the broader your charitable purpose, the better, because it allows for flexibility in the operation of your organization. Go ahead and throw your website in here if you have one. If you have the domain but the website's not up yet, throw that in there. Now, getting into the officers, directors, and trustees, we're going to want you to list out all of the people here. One thing to point out that sometimes confuses folks is that directors are your board members, board of directors, right? And then your officers are people like the executive director, your secretary, your treasurer, your CFO. And the thing that confuses people is that your board of directors can have a president, a treasurer, and a secretary. And your officer positions can also be president, treasurer, and secretary. And in small organizations, those three people might be the same three people. So the same president, treasurer, and secretary of the board might be the same three individuals that are president, secretary, and treasurer of the organization. They could be different. Those three on the board could be three totally different people for the organization, and they're two separate roles that all have the same titles, and that's why it gets confusing for folks. But remember, they can be the same, they can be different, and the important thing to mention is that the president of the organization cannot also be the treasurer or the secretary. Those have to be different people, and that's for conflict of interest reasons. If the president controls the treasury, the funds and the finances, they can do some sneaky stuff. And so those officer positions for a nonprofit have to be different people. But again, if those three different people for the board are the same three people for the organization, that's totally fine. And you can have more directors than just those three. So please list out all of the people here. If there's no annual compensation, that's totally fine. Nonprofits are volunteer-based often. Just put NA there or leave it blank. Now, moving to employees. Employees are going to be people that are paid. They are not going to be independent contractors. Super important clarification there. We have a section for independent contractors next. You'll see it on the screen. Employees only for this section, please, and include everything here. If they're not going to be paid, they are not employees. You do not need to include them here. Independent contractors. And then, of course, there's also this button here of $50,000 or more per year, and make sure to pay attention to that question. Now, independent contractors. These are people that are not going to be on salary. They are not paid through payroll. They are contracted out like vendors. Technically speaking, us as your lawyers, we are an independent contractor. We receive a W-9 instead of a 1099 because we're a company and technically a vendor, but it's the same, but different. Independent contractors in this question, however, are going to be individuals that you're paying for things that they're going to do for the organization. If you're paying someone to design the website, if you're paying someone to be a grant writer, things like that, please include their information here. And then also remember there's the 50,000. That's a big number for the IRS, so always pay attention to that question. Now, questions right here. Conflict of interest policy. Approving compensation arrangements. Do you have the compensation arrangements in writing? Are you going to be doing the decisions for the organization in writing? Will you have all of these different sort of things here? These are all the things that we are going to help you with. So things like conflict of interest policy, yes, you're going to have that. You can check that because we will give it to you. But things about deciding compensation, having written compensation in place, these are not part of our flat fee package. You should work with us and our team to put these into place. And if you plan to have these things in writing and you plan to have these things in place and you might plan to work with us for these things, please check yes on these. If you check no, we're going to ask for an explanation. So you'll find throughout this questionnaire that certain things trigger additional boxes, and that's important because we need those explanations as to why not. And if you have any questions on these, please just ask us. We can help with all of these for sure. And then these ones that folks get a little bit confused on sometimes is, will you be sort of having transactions with your employees or with your directors? And if you will, definitely make sure to answer these correctly and give us an explanation and upload any agreements that you have. A common example is that we are sometimes asked to be on the board of these organizations that we're helping to form. And if we are on the board and you're also paying us for legal services, then that answer right here, do you have any directors that you'll actually be purchasing goods or services from? Yes. And then you can explain here, you might want to spell it better than me. Things like that. And don't worry that if you answer yes or no to these questions, that it's going to torpedo your whole application with the IRS. The IRS sees some wacky stuff. And as long as what you're doing is legal, and as long as what you do is you make it clear here and you disclose it in your application, it's going to be good. Now, there are some things in here that you might check yes or no on that were like, hey, not so good for the IRS review, and we'll talk that out with you. But by and large, and for the purposes of you filling out this actual questionnaire, don't worry about that. Answer it as accurately as you can, and then we will address anything with you that we think might be problematic for the IRS. Now, this one is an important one because you do have to have a certain number of your directors that are disinterested, and that means that they're either not paid by the organization and they're also not related to someone that is paid by the organization. And so these types of things are going to ask us about that, right? And so are any of the officers or directors related to each other? And if yes, you got to explain that. And we'll take a look at this and we'll walk you through how to maybe reframe that for the IRS in a way that they like. Again, not bad, not necessarily good. It's just something that we have to disclose. Business relationships. This is another one where, for instance, like if you're working with us, you would disclose, if we're a director, that you also have a business relationship with us. But this one is a little bit more specific to when you actually have like other businesses. So, for instance, if I'm starting an organization and I have a business with someone and we both own that business as business partners and we're both going to be board of directors members, so both directors for the organization, you would write yes here and you would explain that situation. And what I just described, having control of a for-profit together, well then if we're both also on the board, so me and my business partner, we own a business together, and then we're both also on the board of this organization, that is common control because we have organizational control through the board, and then we also have control through another company of a company. And so those are going to be considered common control that you would be answering here. But the important thing to mention on this point is that it's not just ownership there and then being on the board. It's that the ownership makeup there and the board makeup here are the same individuals or mostly the same individuals. So let's say that company, it's me, the partner I mentioned, and 5 other owners. But then on the board of directors, it's me and that partner, and it's 5 other individuals that are not the same ones that are at that for-profit. That's probably not going to be considered common control. But out of an abundance of caution, just go ahead and mention things like that where we're both owners and we're both on the board, and then we can help refine that for the IRS application. Because the important point here is if it were to be me and that partner and then the 5 people that own that company, and then it's me and that partner and the same 5 people that own that company are the board members, that is definitely common control because it's unanimously the same, and that goes above and beyond the majority same. Now, this one is going to be about, do you have leases or contracts or loans or other agreements with the organization itself and the officers or directors or the highest paid employees, and then similarly with this 35% interest here. And so make sure to read these. This is another one where if you say yes, we're going to ask for more information. And really important to disclose these because these are the things that the IRS is looking at to make sure that there's no conflicts of interest for your organization. Again, not bad or good if you disclose these things. It's just something that we have to disclose and then potentially put some sort of like operating guardrails in place so that with these potential conflicts of interest, you're not actually going afoul of conflict of interest and giving people preferential treatment or better rates or letting them benefit from the tax exemption, things like that. That's what the IRS is looking for here. And you just need to include when you actually have these arrangements in place between the organization and the directors or employees. And this is a little bit different. Before we've been talking about where individual board members might have relationships with other board members or employees. This is the organization. So this would be the organization itself hiring these folks. So, when I mentioned before, do you have any contracts or anything like that with your board members, and I mentioned us for legal services, this is another place where that would go in because you do have a contract with us as your law firm, If we're a board member, you have to list it here. Remember though, just us being a vendor to you, if we're not also on your board or an employee or a high paid contractor, you don't have to list us here. I want to make that clear. We only need to be listed, and you only need to list these things when you have contracts with or outside relationships with people that are board members, that are employees, staff, contractors, things like that. That's not usually going to be the case about us if we're not on your board or your employees. Now, this is about the actual work programming functions of your organization. And so make sure to read these very carefully. We do have little kind of call outs there when you hover over it that give you a little bit more detail. And this is going to be another one where we ask you for extra detail. And as you can see here, the more context, detail, descriptions, all of that you can provide us, the better, because that's going to allow us to then better refine the answers for the IRS, which everything you give us here, we're going to take another pass at it, make it more palatable for the IRS. We're not going to change anything, obviously, but we're going to write it in a way that the IRS likes to see it to further streamline your application. And so all of these, these are important for you to look at and make sure that you're answering very clearly and very truthfully. And you'll see, we're going back to these family relationships and these outside business relationships, because what the IRS is always going to be looking for is that you're not providing any preferential treatment for family members, for folks that you work with outside of the organization, things like that. And so very important to make sure that, if you plan on giving any sort of goods or you plan on giving any services to anyone, that it's not people that are related to you, not people that you do business with otherwise. And even if it is, because you can do that, and in those scenarios you have to have the guardrails in place that I mentioned before. And so if that is the plan, you should have a conversation with us about, okay, well, how can we make it so we can do that? We can give things to family members or people that we do business with, but not run afoul of conflict of interest. And it's hard. You have to give it to other people, not just them. But by and large, you want to make sure that you're not having any preferential treatment like that. There's not any specific pool of individuals that receive benefits. And so, like grants, we've had questions before where they're like, yeah, we want to do grants only to family members. Can't really do that. That's definitely preferential treatment. We want to do grants only to people that are employed by this one employer. Can't really do that. That's preferential treatment. So you can see kind of, hopefully through my thought process in these explanations, what the IRS is looking for and what we're asking for. And again, always please ask us questions if you have any. Political activity. You can do some if you're a 501c3, which is what this application and questionnaire is for, but not much. So that's why you have to tell us here whether or not you're doing any of these things. Then please give us as much detail as possible and how much of your activity this will be, because there's a sort of percentage of your activity threshold or a percentage of your expenditures threshold that your political activity has to be below. And so please tell us, how much money you'd be spending on it, how much time you'd be spending on it, things like that. And that'll help us here advise and help shape that for the application. Now, bingo, gaming, raffles, things like that. If you're going to be doing those, got to let us know. Those typically require additional registrations with your state. And then here, important to kind of tell us all of the ways that you're going to raise money, give us details about what that looks like, and then also tell us which states and places you plan to raise money, and if you've hired anyone to raise money, and give us a bunch of detail there, because all of these things can trigger other registrations. They can trigger further review by the IRS, so on and so forth. So again, like anything else here, please provide us additional details so that we can then work with you to make sure that these answers work with the IRS, or we can help guide you on how to reshape some of your programming in order to be better compliant and give us and you and the IRS a better chance of approving your application. And then this one's really important if you're actually like a successor to a for-profit or a successor to a previous organization. These are pretty specific questions that ask about what that situation looked like. And it's going to be things like, did you take over 25% or more of their assets? Is this organization or that organization affiliated with governments? Are you taking over the volunteers? Things like that. And please ask us questions if you're confused by any of these. It's really important. Typically, we will have advised you on this in advance if there's any question of this being involved, and just go with our recommendations there. Financials. This is the big one where people get paralyzed and they don't know how to answer because they don't know what their finances are going to look like. And trust me, I get it. Nobody has a crystal ball, like I've said before. So this one is your best guess. And you'll notice that we need previous, current, and then future tax years, right? And so what you'll need to do is include everything for those years, even if it's all zeros. If in your previous years it's all zeros, then that's just how you need to answer. And that's totally fine. That's going to be acceptable to the IRS. But if you've received anything at all, even if it's $10, you need to put that in there. If it's $10,000, you need to put that in there. If it's $10 million, you need to put that in there. And then if it's into the future and you have no idea, it's estimates. It's what you hope to see. And you don't have to get really aspirational here. You don't have to really minimize it. It's what you expect and hope for. And these are ballpark numbers. They're estimates. The IRS knows that. If you don't hit those numbers or you're above those numbers or below those numbers, totally fine. The IRS gets that. So don't get paralyzed by this. Just do your best guess and your best job of putting in here what you've gotten and what you expect to get in future years. And then, guess what? You're done. Well, not really. You got to do this last part. Psych. So this last part is the ones that require itemization. We're going to need to see you itemize those amounts. And so you'll see here, this one, and this one require itemization for this chart. This one is going to require itemization for this one, and this one. I don't know why we went that way with the numbers, but you'll need to itemize those down here if you actually enter amounts into 3, 8, or 7, or 1, 4, or 7 up here. And again, best guess here does not have to be perfect, and we'll help you with any of the numbers if we think that they are off or missing. And then you'll click submit. If you're not done yet, and you can see here this one saying, hey, you can't continue because there are required spots that you haven't filled in, that's when you're going to go ahead and save your progress. And you can get a shareable link to share with your team members. It just copies automatically, or you'll have gotten an email, which again, pretty important to have entered your email here, because that's where the email for saving is going to be sent. So hopefully you stuck it out. 22, probably 23 minutes by the time we finish this. Hope this was helpful. Please let us know if you have any questions on the video or the questionnaire or on the process or on life. Just kidding. We're not going to answer those. I don't have answers for that. Hopefully this was helpful. Let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.